Hey guys, tonight we tumble headfirst into a tangle of wishes, fish, and bottled rage, straight out of 1001 Nights. You're standing barefoot on a cold shoreline, dawn bleeding gently across a purple sky. Salt sticks to your skin. Your stomach's been grumbling since yesterday, and you're gripping a frayed net that smells like mold and old crab jokes. You're a fisherman, but not the successful on early retirement kind. You're the kind who makes 4 tries a day, 4 casts of the net, and if nothing comes up, you just go home hungry. Again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals crunch across grit as you drag yourself to the water's edge. Cast 1, nothing but seaweed. Cast 2, some horrifying tangle of bones and someone's lost boot. Cast 3, you nearly dislocate your shoulder pulling up a jar. Not a treasure jar. A squat, soot-black thing sealed with lead and bearing the name of none other than King Solomon. Ah yeah, that's Solomon, the one with the ring, the wisdom, and supposedly a penchant for genie-related home security systems. Historians still argue whether Solomon actually ruled over genies, or if he just had very creative press releases. You squint at the jar. It rattles. You don't remember fish rattling, naturally. Instead of tossing it back into the sea, like a sane person with a sense of self-preservation, you pry it open. The lid flies off. A lazy ribbon of smoke and unfurls. It stretches up like it's doing morning yoga, and boom. Suddenly the air is full of wind and shadow, and something that smells faintly like ozone and rage. From that impossible cloud forms a colossal figure, a genie. Not the Disney kind, no friendly vest, no bad impressions. This guy's all jagged teeth, charred bronze skin, and a voice like thunder murmuring threats. Prepare to die, he says, in what you assume is his inside voice. You blink. I just woke you up, but he isn't here for your reasoning skills. Turns out this guy, let's call him Grudgy McDuststorm, has been stuck in that jar for centuries. First 100 years, he promised eternal riches to whoever freed him. Second 100, a kingdom. Third, he was still hopeful someone might show up. 4th century, though, the bitterness set in. Now, the genies decided that whoever frees him will die. Harsh performance review. You protest. Naturally, you're poor. You're polite. And honestly, you're not even wearing socks. But the genie crosses his arms and grins. No exceptions. Historically, belief in genies, or jinn, was widespread across Islamic and pre-Islamic folklore. They were said to be made of smokeless fire, living invisibly alongside humans. Some were kind, others, well, you're meeting one now. You start stalling. Hold up, you say, before you turn me into barbecue. Can I just ask, how did you fit in that jar? He narrows his eyes. You've struck a nerve. The genie gestures vaguely at the jar and scoffs. Magic. You shake your head. No way. That jar's 2 feet tall. And you, he frowns. It's just, you don't look like you'd fit. You add, I mean, I don't want to call you bloated, but your arms alone. It's a ridiculous gamble. But one thing's always been true about ancient beings with massive egos. They hate being called out. You doubt me? The genie hisses. You shrug. Playing dumb. Not saying it's impossible. Just saying, if I'm about to die, I at least want to understand how all of that, you gesture to his towering mass, fit in that. The genie, foolish, furious, flattered, goes, fine. Watch closely, and just like that, he unravels. Smoke spirals, sparks fizzle. He funnels himself neatly, smugly, right back into the jar. You don't hesitate. You slam the lid back on and sit on it. Welcome to your new job, Genie Negotiator. It's surprisingly satisfying, hearing muffled cursing from inside a jar. Fun fringe fact. In certain medieval Arab texts, jinn were believed to have hierarchies and could even take exams to climb ranks. So if your jar genie's particularly cranky, maybe he flunked genie algebra. Now, you've got a powerful being trapped in a canister, and you're deciding what to do next. You could chuck him back into the sea. Let someone else have this mess in another few centuries. Or you could cut a deal. After all, a genie was once willing to offer kingdoms and wealth. Your stomach growls. Maybe start with lunch, still sitting on the jar. You clear your throat and announce, "Okay, Smokey, we're going to try this again. But first, you have to swear not to kill me." Muffled silence. "I mean it." Oath. Magic promise. Swear on whatever it is genies swear on. Your last 100 years of boredom. Maybe, eventually, the jar vibrates with an exasperated hum. Then, fine, you slowly ease off the lid and crack it open. Smoke again, and the genie rises. But this time, he's less fiery death and more disgruntled intern. Arms folded, expression sour. "I underestimated you," he mutters. You smirk. "Yeah, people do that." The genie hovers. "What now?" "Now. Well, now you're in possession of a creature straight out of myth. But before you push your luck, you decide to stall again. With a story. A story, you say, about a king, a vizier, a betrayal. You hold up your hand. "Trust me, it's relevant." And weirdly, the genie listens. That's the magic of stories. Sometimes, they're the only way to survive till morning. You clear your throat, brush a bit of genie smoke off your robe, and say, "So, here's one for you. Long ago, in a distant land where the sun always seemed to rise suspiciously early, there lived a mighty king named Yunnan." The genie floats in silence, arms crossed like he's still trying to decide whether to applaud or incinerate you. You continue anyway. King Yunnan had everything: palaces, gold, a pet peacock with anxiety issues. But one thing he didn't have: health. The man was rotting from the inside out. His skin flaked like old paint. His breath wheezed like a haunted bellows. And every doctor within 3 kingdoms had prescribed everything from fire cupping to camel dung tea. Nothing worked. The genie snorts, a curl of smoke escaping from his nostril. Maybe he's warming up to this. Then, you go on. A new physician arrived. Duban, a name destined to be mispronounced at royal banquets. He was brilliant, strange, and wore a robe stitched with astrological signs and bird feathers. Historians still argue whether Duban was Persian, Greek, or just that one guy who reads Wikipedia at midnight. Duban took one look at King Yunnan and said, "No problem. I'll cure you. Without potions, powders, or bleeding." Which, given medieval medicine, was like saying, "I'll fix your Wi-Fi using moonlight." The king, desperate, agreed. And Duban's treatment? Unorthodox doesn't even begin to cover it. He carved out a wooden polo stick, hollowed its shaft, and packed it with secret herbs and alchemical dust. Then he handed it to the king and said, "Go play a few rounds." Naturally, the king was confused until he did it. He rode his horse, swung the stick, broke a royal sweat, and the dust, absorbed through his palms, worked its magic. By the end of the game, his skin had cleared up. His lungs sang like flutes, and he could finally breathe without sounding like a creaky door hinge. Duban, Yusei, looking meaningfully at the genie, was hailed as a miracle worker. He was showered with riches. He got a corner suite in the palace. Life was good. For about 5 minutes, Yu sighed dramatically. See, King Yunnan had a vizier. One of those whispery little schemers with a goatee and chronic trust issues. The kind of guy who'd see a hero and think, suspicious. The vizier didn't like Duban. Too popular, too clever, too healthy. So he started planting seeds of doubt in the king's ear. This man, the vizier whispered, cured you without touching your insides. Imagine what else he could do with that kind of power. What if he poisoned you next time? Now, here's your historical fact snack for the evening. In many medieval courts, both Middle Eastern and European, it was terrifyingly common for healers to be executed if their remedies didn't work fast enough, or sometimes if they worked too well. Success could breed as much suspicion as failure. The genie raises an eyebrow. He's listening closer now. You nod solemnly. King Yunnan resisted at first, but doubt is a slow poison, and eventually, he summoned Duban and said, "Thanksies for the cure. Now please prepare to die." The physician blinked. Excuse me? But it was no use. The king's mind had been twisted. Duban, knowing he couldn't escape, made one final request. Give me a day to set my affairs in order, and let me give you a final gift. The king agreed. Duban returned the next day with a thick book, its pages glued together like a dessert you regret ordering. He told the king, "Read this after I'm gone. You'll find treasures inside." Then he died, executed, swift and clinical, and the king, grief already souring in his gut, opened the book and turned the first page and tried to turn the second, and then started clawing at his throat. Duban had laced the pages with poison, absorbed through the fingers, just like the cure. The king dropped dead before he made it halfway through. That, you tell the genie, is what happens when you betray the person who saves your life. A long silence follows. The genie's expression flickers. You can almost see the gears grinding behind those smoky eyes. "So, you're comparing me to King Yunnan," he mutters. You shrug. "I mean, you were going to murder the one guy who set you free. Not a great look." He folds his arms tighter. The king's betrayal was based on fear. Mine was based on boredom. Same flavor of dumb. You reply. And, anyway, you're the one who agreed to listen. The genie hovers lower. "What became of that fisherman?" he asks. You raise an eyebrow. "Oh, you're interested in my story again?" He grumbles something inaudible. But you sense the shift. You've bought more than just time. You've carved open a crack of curiosity in this ancient thundercloud of bad moods. You take a deep breath of sea air. Somewhere behind you, gulls scream like they just stepped on Lego bricks. "All right," you say. "Since you're in a storytelling mood, how about I tell you what happened next? Because the fisherman wasn't done." "Neither," you add. "Was the genie." A modern aside floats in your brain like driftwood. Sometimes, survival means knowing when to talk, when to bluff, and when to monologue dramatically by the sea. You look the genie in the eye. Ready for the next one? He doesn't answer, but he doesn't disappear either. That's a yes. The genie hasn't said a word for several seconds, which is a miracle for someone with centuries of pent-up opinions. But you can feel his smoky presence hovering in place, just above the tide line. He's still here. He's listening. And that's your cue to keep the story flowing. like a pot of spiced coffee in a Baghdad marketplace. So, where were we, you murmur? More for effect than memory. Ah, yes, the fisherman. You remember him. Calloused hands, threadbare net, hopeless life. He'd just outwitted a vengeful smoke beast by telling a tale of betrayal and poetic justice. And now, with his own life hanging in the balance, he decided to double down. Because let's be real, one dramatic parable doesn't always melt centuries of resentment. The genie, still visibly brooding, crossed his arms and scowled. Fine, he growled, voice like gravel in a windstorm. Tell me another. Impress me. But if I get bored, yeah, the fisherman waved him off. You'll boil me in your weird antique bottle. We've covered this. So he cleared his throat again, adjusted his wet tunic, and began a second story. Because clearly, bedtime tales were now the only thing standing between him and sudden combustion. There was once, he began, a mighty king named Sinbad. No relation. You add quickly, just in case the genie's historical memory is sharper than expected. This one wasn't the sailor. This one ruled over a lush kingdom with towering walls and gardens full of pomegranates so ripe they practically begged to be eaten. Now, here's your historical nibble for this section. In many regions of the medieval Islamic world, especially under the Abbasid Caliphate, gardens were considered reflections of paradise. Meticulously designed with fountains, symmetrical plantings, and fruit trees. They weren't just decoration. They were theological flexing. You weren't a real ruler if your courtyard didn't have a water feature and at least one exotic bird yelling into the void. Anyway, King Sinbad had it all. Wealth, power, even decent advisors, a rarity. But what he really loved was riddles. He would pose them to everyone. Guards, cooks, merchants, stray camels. And if they couldn't solve them, he'd sigh dramatically and declare that the world had no wisdom left in it. But then one day, a common man arrived at court, a pauper. No fancy lineage, no silk robes, just a dusty traveler with a gleam in his eye and a voice like cool water poured over stones. He asked for an audience. The guards laughed. The king, however, overheard, and because he was either open-minded or chronically bored, he allowed the man to speak. "I've heard you love riddles," the stranger said, bowing low. "Would your majesty like to hear one that even the stars haven't solved?" You can practically hear the genie scoff. "Stars don't solve riddles." The fisherman shrugs. Neither do most kings. But that didn't stop this one. The stranger's riddle was deceptively simple. Just a few lines about a bird, trapped in a golden cage, longing to fly but afraid of the open sky. The kind of metaphor that gives literature students mild panic attacks. King Sinbad pondered. He paced. He consulted scrolls, priests, possibly even a squirrel. But after 3 days, he still had no answer. Frustrated, but also impressed, he said, "Name your reward. Whatever you want." And here's where it gets interesting. The pauper didn't ask for gold. He didn't ask for land. He asked for the king's trust, just a quiet room in the palace, a few books, and the promise that he'd be allowed to whisper advice in the king's ear once a day. Historians still argue whether this stranger was a real person or a legendary stand-in for court advisors who operated behind the curtain, shaping policy while appearing powerless. But however you interpret it, one thing is clear. The king agreed, and over time, the stranger's advice turned the kingdom from prosperous to legendary. Trade routes flourished, famine ended, poetry thrived. Even the peacocks seemed more emotionally stable. But not everyone was thrilled. You guessed it. The old advisors, the ones who liked being the only voices in the king's head. So they started murmuring, "This man is not what he seems. He came from nowhere. He knows too much. What if he's a sorcerer? What if he's ensnaring you?" Fear. Again. One day, the king reluctantly asked the stranger, "Do you serve me with loyalty? Or are you playing a longer game?" And the stranger just smiled. "Your Majesty, if I wished to betray you, I wouldn't need riddles. That was too cryptic for comfort." So, as paranoia always does, it won. The king ordered the stranger imprisoned, and the kingdom began to crumble, slowly. Then, all at once, trade faltered. Plagues returned. The fountains dried up. Turns out, when you cage the bird that once guided your song, all you hear afterward is silence. You pause the story, gaze shifting toward the genie's floating form. He's watching you like a cat watches a fishbowl, suspicious, maybe hungry. "I'm sensing a theme," he says slowly. "Kings, betrayal, wise people punished." You grin. "Just saying. People don't always recognize value when it floats into their lives in a bottle." The genie lets out a sound that could be a laugh or indigestion. "Tell me another," he says, and just like that, you're still alive. Now, let's toss in one more odd tidbit before we wrap this section. Did you know that in early Arabic storytelling circles, it was common to embed stories within stories as a way of testing not just listeners' memory, but their patience? Some tales went 7 layers deep, like a historical onion. If that onion smelled like rosewater and conspiracy, back in the present, the fisherman stretches, still dripping seawater, still ridiculously close to annihilation. But the genie is hooked. "You know," the fisherman says casually, "I've got another one. Has to do with a prince who turned into a statue." The genie's eye glow flickers. "Oh," he murmurs, "that one." You sit down on the damp sand, one elbow on your knee, the other hand sketching circles absently, as if warming up for another bedtime banger. The genie, half smoke, half attitude, hovers close, arms crossed. The bottle he came out of still glistens faintly beside you, its narrow neck casting a crescent shadow in the moonlight. So, you begin. "Let's talk statues. Royal ones, the tragic kind." The genie leans in. His eyes glow a little brighter, which in his case is either interest or the magical equivalent of raised eyebrows. "There was once a prince," you say, "young, few, brilliant, very easy on the eyes, lived in a city of shining domes and marble towers, where every balcony smelled of jasmine and baked honey cakes." And now you pause for a whiff of historical spice. The Abbasid-era cities, like Baghdad and Samarra, often featured ziggurat-inspired architecture and geometric tile work, so intricate it made even the math of verse feel seen. Water channels crisscrossed the courtyards, and at night, oil lamps shimmered against limestone walls. No detail too small, no embellishment too extra. But back to the prince. He had everything: education, charisma, even a trained cheetah that walked beside him like a slightly judgmental dog. And, of course, there was love. Because what's a good nightmare bedtime tale without a messy romance? Her name was Sahar, a poet's daughter with ink-stained fingertips and a tendency to insult powerful men in rhyming couplets. The prince met her during one of those anonymous royal walkabouts. You know the kind. Cloak over the face, bad accent, hello, and fellow poor people energy. Only she saw right through him. Instead of swooning, she corrected his grammar. Naturally, he fell in love immediately. The prince began courting her in secret, sneaking out at night, whispering verses under her window. It was all very theatrical and very dangerous, Because his vizier, an oily man named Jafar, not that Jafar, but close, had other plans. Jafar wanted the prince to marry the daughter of a neighboring sultan, for alliances, for trade, for access to certain, let's say, strategic spice routes. Historians still argue whether this marriage was truly political, or whether Jafar just had a deeply unhealthy obsession with clove monopolies. The prince refused. The vizier panicked. Now, here's your fringe fact of the evening. In certain pockets of early Islamic mysticism, especially among fringe alchemists, there were whispered recipes for living stone. Not statues exactly, but objects infused with life essence, meant to preserve knowledge. Most were scams. Some allegedly weren't. So Jafar, who'd once studied under a questionable scholar with a goat named Algebra, remembered one of those recipes. He brewed a potion, tricked the prince into drinking it, and in the blink of a moonbeam, bam, statue, frozen mid-step, hands outstretched, lips parted in a word no one would ever hear. They placed him in the center of the palace garden, said he'd gone on a spiritual retreat, and left the statue as a commemorative placeholder. Sahar, devastated, she searched for him, pleaded at court, even confronted Jafar directly. He laughed. She slapped him so hard that the palace dog howled, but she wasn't done. No, no. This was not a woman who wrote poems for leisure. She wrote curses in meter. She began composing verses, powerful, mournful, laced with anger and salt from her tears. She read them aloud in the garden, every day, and slowly, oh so slowly, the statue began to change. One fingertip moved, then an eyebrow, and on the seventh day, his heart beat once, loud enough to crack stone. Just one beat, but enough to wake the palace. They exiled Sahar, called her a witch. She went to live in the mountains, where they say she still writes. And the prince? Well, he remains frozen, but his eyes follow you if you walk past. Creepy, but poetic. You glance at the genie. See the theme? I do. He says flatly. Power betraying love, magic misused, tragic consequences, and statues, you add helpfully. Can't go wrong with statues. The genie exhales through his nose, his version of a sigh. You're trying to make me feel guilty. You smile. Am I? He's quiet for a while. Then, softly. You said his heart beat once? You nod. Once, a flicker passes across the genie's smoke. Not sadness exactly, but something close. Like a breeze through ashes. You let the silence stretch. Then, gently, you shift into the next tale, because you know the rhythm of this now. One story folds into another. No gaps, no rest, just soft darkness and rising stakes. But first, one more curious tidbit to nestle into your brain. Did you know that many medieval Islamic scholars believed statues could house jinn, especially if made from specific types of black basalt? The practice was widely condemned, of course, but, well, people do love playing with fire. You glance again at the genie. He notices and doesn't deny it. You sit back, muscles sore from too much storytelling and existential dread. But you're still here, still talking, still alive. And as long as you're speaking, the genie isn't folding you into a vaporous snack. That's what we call bedtime strategy. The genie drifts lower, his coils of smoke thinning near the ground, almost as if he's lounging or sulking. Hard to say with vapor. You scoot a little closer to the bottle, just in case. Insurance policy. He says nothing, so you keep the stories going. Momentum is your friend, and silence with a genie is never really silent. It listens. All right, you say, brushing sand from your palm. Let's rewind a little. You ever hear the tale of the Black Island? Not the happy beachy kind. This one's all storms and sorcery. The genie's gaze flickers. So do the stars above you. Coincidence? Probably. But still, you begin. There was once a sultan who ruled a crescent of islands, the Black Island being the largest and strangest volcanic rock. Wind that howled like it was filing a complaint. Crops grew in weird cycles, grapes in winter, pomegranates in July. Locals blamed deep magic, which is how people describe stuff they don't want to investigate, but also don't want to admit they're afraid of. The Sultan's name, Suleiman al-Damashqi, a ruler so obsessed with order, he arranged his library alphabetically by scent. Lemongrass scrolls here, oud-scented epics there. He had 147 concubines, but historians still argue whether he knew any of their names or just referred to them by room number. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. During the early 10th century, there really was a flourishing tradition of magical realism in Arabic literature, often blending folklore with precise geography. The idea of black islands, or cursed lands, often symbolized knowledge forbidden or hidden, like ancient Alexandria's lost scrolls, wrapped in a metaphorical fog. Suleiman hated metaphor. He also hated surprises. So when the island's animals began turning to stone overnight, he demanded answers. That's when the sorceress appeared. She wasn't summoned. She arrived, cloaked in seaweed and pearl-colored robes, eyes like thunderclouds, and a voice that sounded like waves scraping a cliff face. She called herself Zarmina, just Zarmina. No title, no pleasantries. She told the Sultan that the land was under a curse, that something buried beneath the palace had woken up. He laughed, a big Sultan-sized belly laugh. You can picture it, rings clinking, beard bobbing, several scrolls falling off a shelf, just from the force of the mirthquake. He ordered her thrown into the dungeon. Spoiler, that was a poor choice. Within 3 nights, his favorite horse turned to marble mid-gallop. The royal cook's laughter echoed through the halls, long after he himself had fossilized into an apricot-colored bust. And worst of all, the books. Oh, the poor, poor books. They too began to petrify. Zarmina didn't escape the dungeon. She didn't need to. The stones around her crumbled of their own accord. She walked free. And when the guards tried to stop her, their swords turned into vines. Laughing vines. Now here's a fringe tidbit for your pillow. Some Sufi texts speak of earth whispers, places in the world where stone retains memory and can be awoken under the right spell or emotional frequency. Most scholars scoff. Others nod very slowly and don't make eye contact. Back on the island, Zarmina gave the Sultan a choice: leave the land forever or be absorbed by it. Naturally, he chose a third option: stab her with a ceremonial dagger made of meteorite. She caught it mid-air, smiled, and whispered one word. To this day, no one knows what she said. But the palace melted like wax. The ground split. The sea rushed in, and the Black Island, gone. Or so they say. Some claim that on moonless nights, the island still surfaces. You can walk its shores. Feel your feet sink, not into sand, but memory. And if you listen closely, you'll hear pages fluttering beneath the ground, trying to finish a sentence they started 1,000 years ago. The genie hums faintly now. I've heard that one, he murmurs. Only the Sultan was a woman, and she became the island. Historians still argue about the gender. You say lightly, and whether the island ever existed. He doesn't smile, but he also doesn't turn you into a dust mite. You count that as a win. You know, you add, shifting onto your side. A lot of these stories end with people being turned into statues or animals. Or let the lessons. The genie interrupts. They become lessons. You stare at him. Did you just say something wise? He scowls. Don't get used to it. Fair enough. A breeze picks up. Somewhere out at sea, a gull shrieks, like it just stepped on a Lego. You nestle a little deeper into your seat, sand cooling against your calves. So what happened to Zarmina? You ask after a while. The genie thinks. She lived alone for centuries, then became a whisper in the sea foam. Or a god. Or both. Of course, you let the silence settle again, this time thick and briny, the kind that coats your tongue and curls your dreams. Then you nudge the story forward again, because sleep's not here yet, and you still have time to distract a possibly cranky immortal. Just you, a bottle, and the night curling gently around the edges of your voice. You draw a lazy spiral in the sand with your fingertip, and the genie watches like he's trying to guess if it's a symbol, or a threat, or just fidgeting. You smirk. It's all three. Really? Well, you say, stretching your legs out. I think it's time for a real crowd pleaser. A classic, the kind of tale where everyone gets cursed, half the cast gets transformed, and nobody learns the right lesson. The genie raises an eyebrow. Is that the official genre title? You shrug. It should be. And so begins the tale of the enchanted lake. There was once a king, you explain, who ruled a city so remote that even the clouds hesitated to visit. A fog-wrapped place of silvery pines, cold stars, and rivers that whispered in 6 different dialects. His name was King Mahmud, and he was deeply, profoundly, mind-meltingly bored. Despite his riches, he found no joy in courtly games, no thrill in conquest, and no peace in poetry. His favorite pastime? Wandering into the woods, disguised as a peasant and asking people confusing riddles. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual journey or a form of peasant bullying. But one day, he stumbled on something he couldn't explain. A shimmering lake in a clearing where no lake should have been. The water was deep purple, the surface utterly still, and around its edges stood dozens of fish, standing, upright, thus silent, on tiny fish legs, not moving, not swimming, just staring. And that was the least weird part. Here's your historical fact for tonight's sleep-deprived neurons. The concept of enchanted lakes appears in multiple traditions: Arabian, Persian, even Berber folktales. These lakes often serve as portals, prisons, or mirrors, sometimes all three. In many versions, they reflect not the sky but the soul. Mahmud leaned in. A fish blinked. He blinked back. Then a voice, smooth as ink poured on silk, called out from behind him. You like my collection? He turned, and there she was. A woman so beautiful, she made the moon look like a chewed-up pearl. Skin like honey stirred with ash. Hair the color of burnt cinnamon. She wore silver rings on every finger, and a smile so sly, it practically had legs. She called herself Nahira. A sorceress? Probably. A goddess? Possibly. A woman you should absolutely never lie to. Definitely. She explained that the fish had once been citizens of a kingdom. Her kingdom. One she ruled alongside her beloved husband, who had, unfortunately, fallen in love with her sister. Classic. Only this sister wasn't just a homewrecker. She was a rebel with a harem full of opinions. Nahira found out. Did she cry? No. Did she write poetry? Also no. She turned the entire kingdom into aquatic bystanders. One spell, one lake, boom. And the cheating husband? Well, she kept him in a bottle, not unlike the genie sitting beside you now. Hey, the genie says, noticing your glance. Don't compare me to a romantic failure in a jar. Sorry, you say. He was corked. You're stoppered. Huge difference. Back to the story. Nahira told Mahmoud she was tired of ruling an aquarium. She wanted real people again, real conversation, someone to make puns with. And Mahmoud, who hadn't had a proper mystery in years, offered to help break the spell. But, plot twist, he had to earn it. One riddle a day, 3 days, fail, and he would become a fish. But like a standing fish? You ask aloud. The genie just shrugs. The first riddle was a doozy. Something about a ship that sails without wind and a crew that sleeps in rows. Mahmoud guessed a book. Nahira raised an eyebrow but nodded. Second riddle. What devours all things, has no mouth, and leaves only memories? Time? Easy? He nailed it. Third riddle? Well, she asked. What walks without legs, sings without breath, and dies the moment it is named? He hesitated. The stars held their breath. He said, silence, and the lake shivered, one by one. The fish fell backward, splashing into the water, their tiny legs vanishing in a shimmer. The lake began to churn. The spell cracked like sugar glass. Nahira smiled, not with joy, but with something heavier. Regret? Closure? Satisfaction laced with loneliness? With a wave of her hand, the bottle containing her husband appeared, and she unstoppered it. A gasp of golden smoke escaped. He was free, but they didn't embrace. She turned away, and he, now human again, looked at Mahmoud, then at the lake, and said only, it wasn't worth it. He walked into the forest and never came back. Nahira vanished in a silver burst, and the lake, still there, but normal now, or mostly normal. If you walk its shore at twilight, sometimes the ripples spell words, usually unflattering ones. You lean back and sigh. Moral of the story? The genie speaks slowly. Even gods get lonely. You nod. And trust issues can sink kingdoms. Another breeze slides through, cool as whispered secrets. Your eyes are heavier now. The tails are winding tighter, closer, but there's more to go. There always is. The genie hovers closer. You tell these stories well. Thanks. You mutter. You're still not getting your way. He grins, but it's softer now. You let your eyes flutter shut for a beat, just long enough to hear your heartbeat shift in rhythm with the night. The genie doesn't press. He waits, like someone used to long silences, or maybe just someone used to outliving everyone else in the conversation. When your eyes open again, the fire is crackling lower, and your voice slips back in, smooth as worn silk. But let's raise the stakes. You murmur. How about a story where both parties think they're in control, and neither is? The genie leans in ever so slightly. This is the tale of the two viziers. You paint the scene. A grand city glinting like a gemstone at the desert's edge. Arches everywhere. Domes that catch the sunrise like golden sails. At its heart, the Sultan's palace looms, a labyrinth of courtyards and secrets. And flanking the Sultan, like twin blades, Vizier Harun and Vizier Qasim. Now here's a historical tidbit to tuck under your pillow. In many medieval Islamic courts, the role of the vizier was not unlike that of a prime minister, except the job description often included spying, poisoning, and occasionally dabbling in astrology on company time. The word vizier itself comes from the Arabic wazir, meaning bearer of burdens. And, oh, did these two bear some heavy ones? Harun was elegant, soft-spoken, full of veiled insults and sharper than average cheekbones. He once got a man banished just by arching an eyebrow. Qasim, on the other hand, was loud, loyal, and fond of quoting poetry he absolutely did not write. The Sultan loved them both, and trusted neither. Here's where it gets juicy. Rumors began to slither through the court like perfume. Rumors of a plot to kill the Sultan. Of course, both viziers pointed fingers at the other, so the Sultan, rather than deal with the stress and likely bored out of his mind, proposed a test. He handed each vizier a sealed scroll, a purse of gold, and told them to leave the city for a year, traveling in opposite directions. Whichever one returned with the greatest wisdom would be named Grand Vizier. Qasim departed to the north, Harun to the south. That's where things start to unravel. For both of them, Harun ventured into a forest where the trees whispered rumors. Not metaphorically, literally. Turns out, they were the cursed remnants of a merchant caravan that refused to pay a sorceress for her herbs. The trees told Harun secrets. His secrets? How he'd once bribed a baker to lace Qasim's bread with poppy seeds to make him drowsy before council meetings. How he'd forged omens in the stars using glowworms and colored glass. He fled the forest with a headache and several existential questions. Meanwhile, Qasim stumbled into a valley where dreams walked on two legs. A wandering mystic gave him a mirror that showed not reflections, but regrets. In it, he saw the face of a woman he'd betrayed, a promise he'd broken, and one particularly embarrassing attempt at interpretive dance during a court festival. He tried to smash the mirror. It laughed, and then it whispered something that changed his course. Here comes your fringe folklore bite. Some Andalusian manuscripts speak of mirrors of blame, rare objects that haunt the viewer with personal failure until they either repent or go mad. Historians still argue whether these artifacts were real or just metaphorical warnings against self-deception. Both viziers returned a year later. Harun arrived with a leather-bound book of forest wisdom, cryptic proverbs he barely understood. Qasim brought only the mirror. The Sultan listened. Then he asked, "What's the greatest wisdom you've gained?" Harun recited a line from his book, something about patience being the flower of the bitter root, delivered with all the passion of wet sand. Qasim, he said nothing. Instead, he turned the mirror toward the Sultan, and for a moment, the ruler saw not his face, but his legacy, a throne ringed with suspicion, sons plotting, daughters silenced, a rule polished on the outside, rusted within. The Sultan stood. No anger, no speech. He dismissed them both. In the years that followed, Harun faded from history, reportedly becoming a hermit who only spoke in riddles. Qasim? He opened a school for orphans and poets, and the mirror, it vanished, but rumor says it still surfaces now and then, in bazaars, under moonlit bridges, in the back corners of your dreams. Always silent, always watching. You glance at the genie. You ever seen it? He doesn't blink. Maybe I am it. You snort. Pretty talkative for a mirror. The genie's mouth twitches. Silence stretches between you again. But this one feels like a comfortable robe, not a warning. The stories are settling into your bloodstream now. Slow, soft. A lull beneath the words. You stretch your neck, roll your shoulders. You're tiring. The genie says, "So are you." He nods once, like a man keeping score on a very long list. But you're still not free. You add, his smile is all teeth and night breeze. And you're still stalling. Fair point. You nudge the fire with a stick and whisper, "I think we've got time for one more twist." He closes his eyes, and you begin again. The fire's nothing but glowing bones now. A low red breath on the earth. You scoop a bit of ash between your fingers, rub it absently, like you're polishing a memory. Let's turn things inside out. You murmur. A story where the fool isn't foolish, and the powerful end up powerless. The genie shifts. Intrigued, you begin the tale of the fisherman's second wish. But not our fisherman. Not the one still locked in banter with a smoke-bodied grudge from a brass jar. No, this one's older, or younger, or maybe parallel. Time is fuzzy in stories. This fisherman, let's call him Zod, was poor, but not the usual folktale poor, where his last coin weeps into a cracked bowl. He was a realistic poor, owned a boat that barely floated, a cat that only liked him during dinner, and debts that had begun to grow personalities. He fished the same reef every morning. Same bait, same curses, same sigh when nothing bit, until one dawn. His net came up not with fish, but with a small bottle, slim-necked, blue glass, sealed in red wax. Cue the suspense. Unlike most characters in these tales, Zaid didn't open it immediately. He sniffed it, knocked it against his boat, consulted his cat. The cat blinked, then he pried it open. The genie inside was different. It wasn't a thundercloud of vengeance or a coiled cobra of rage. This genie wore a cravat, had spectacles, introduced himself as Basim, an emotions consultant from the third realm. You pause. Yes, you assure the genie beside you. That was a thing. He scowls. We do not have consultants. Keep telling yourself that. Back to Zaid. Basim stretched, adjusted his tiny monocle, and asked a simple question. Would you like 3 wishes? Or would you prefer one chance to ask why you think you need them? Zaid squinted. Is that a trap? Basim smiled. Only if you're not paying attention. Let's take a detour. Did you know the oldest documented genie stories don't actually offer wishes? That bit crept in later, influenced by European translations trying to spice things up. Originally, jinn might grant favors, yes, but often unprompted, or worse, offered in ways that tested the mortal's morals. Historians still argue whether the 3 wishes trope diluted or enriched the original moral core. Zaud, however, was no fool. He chose the second option, and suddenly, he wasn't in his boat anymore. He stood in a palace, but it was his house, only grander, rugs instead of rushes, silver where the tin had been, his cat on a throne of pillows, smug as sin. He blinked. Every room he entered revealed another version of his life. If he had wished for gold, for love, for revenge. In one, he was emperor, lonely, sick, haunted by poisoned food tasters. In another, he was young again, full of lust and rage, with nothing but regrets on his pillow each morning. In one, he ruled the seas, literally, tentacles, gills, a trident with voices. That one gave him nightmares for weeks. Basim guided him through each scene, like a tour guide at a very specific museum. This is the hallway of bad impulse control. Oh, look, here's the gallery of things you thought would make you happy. Eventually, they came to a quiet field. Just wheat, wind, a house with peeling paint and laughter inside. Zod watched a version of himself laugh, with a woman whose eyes were tired but kind. Children with scrapes and cake-smeared mouths ran circles around them. He had no throne, no riches, just peace. And when he turned to Basim, the genie simply asked, "So, what do you want?" Zaid said, "A net that never rips." And just like that, he was back in his boat. The sea stretched like a patient animal beneath him. His cat yawned. The net lay folded by his feet, smooth, unbreakable, humming softly. No gold, no palaces, just a guarantee that when he worked, his work would hold. Here's your quirky gem of the night. In some strands of North African folklore, magical objects, like never-tearing nets, or eternally full water skins were considered more valuable than treasure because they implied control over one's own labor rather than wealth handed down by fate or luck. That's got a real socialist flavor for a bedtime tale. Huh. Zaid lived long, laughed often, retired by the sea, telling anyone who'd listened that real wishes are the ones you don't ask for until you've met your worst self. You finish the story quietly, your voice just a ribbon now. The genie beside you leans back, arms crossed. That one's not in the official canon, he says. Maybe it should be. He tilts his head. You think it's better to work for what you have. Even in a world where magic is real, you blink slowly. Depends on the magic. And the price. The breeze picks up again, brushing sand over your ankles. You look at your hands. They feel older somehow, but steadier. More? The genie asks. You smile. Always. You stretch your legs toward the dying embers. Your toes barely brush the edge of warmth, but it's enough. The night is quieter now, as if every bird and beetle has paused to listen in. The genie exhales slowly, almost like a sigh of resignation. But you're not done. Not yet. But this next one's different. You say, this one's about transformation. Not the shiny fairy tale kind. The painful, inconvenient, and deeply necessary kind. The genie closes his eyes. He knows where this is going. You begin the tale of the merchant's daughter and the feathered curse. It starts, as so many stories do, with a prideful man. The merchant, Daniel, traded in spices and silk, and also in something far more volatile, assumptions. He believed wealth made him wise, that comfort meant control, that his daughter, Sabrine, was a reflection of his success, not her own person. Sabrine, by contrast, was wild in the way that doesn't always look like rebellion. She didn't burn things down or defy curfews. Instead, she studied maps, climbed walls barefoot, asked the kinds of questions you weren't supposed to ask at dinner, one of which was, why can't I inherit your ships when you die? Daniel laughed like it was adorable. Now, here's a bit of real-world spice for the stew. In many pre-modern Middle Eastern trade cities, women were often legally able to own property and conduct business, but cultural expectations often stifled them from doing so. Historians still argue whether Islamic commercial law was inherently progressive for women, or simply better on paper than in practice. Sabrine, however, wasn't interested in waiting for approval. Late one summer, while Daniel was away, securing yet another cinnamon deal, Sabrine snuck onto one of his cargo ships and hid in a spice barrel bound for the Southern Isles. Uncomfortable? Definitely. Smelled great, though. After several days, and a truly awkward moment, with a rat named Karim. Don't ask. The ship landed on a volcanic island, where birds sang in chords, and even the shadows had teeth. She emerged dizzy, but determined. There, she met the feathered man. He wasn't fully bird, but he wasn't exactly not bird either. Feathers bloomed along his arms like ivy. His eyes were ringed in gold, like hawk's eyes. He spoke in a voice that shimmered, sometimes human, sometimes like a breeze through reeds. He told her, "You trespassed." She replied, "I'm here to learn how to fly." He didn't laugh, but he did tilt his head, which felt like the same thing. Then, without warning, he reached out and touched her forehead. Wings? That's what she grew. Not the glamorous angel kind. These were ragged, too large for her frame, aching with new bones. She screamed, not in pain, but in sheer shock, as her world tilted. "You want control," he said, "but you've never had to lose it first." He left her there, wings dragging behind her like wet laundry, and thus began her apprenticeship. every morning. She tried to take off. Every afternoon, she crashed. Trees became enemies, rocks, her rude roommates. And her wings? They itched. They molted. At one point, she found a feather in her stew and just stared at it, like it had insulted her ancestors. Want something peculiar? Some Persian folklore will include stories of the bird curse, where humans are transformed into birds, not as punishment, but as a rite of passage. It wasn't always about flying. Sometimes it was about falling, just enough to learn how to land. Sabrine did eventually fly, but not in triumph. No, her first flight was a retreat from a storm, a wild boar, and a very territorial owl. She soared, wobbled, wept, and screamed, but she stayed in the air, and then she laughed. When she returned to the feathered man, she was stronger, wilder, smarter. He said, "You know what happens now." She nodded. "I lose the wings." He blinked. "You offer to lose them. That's the trick." She hesitated. "And if I don't, you'll remain powerful. But never rest, never love, never touch the earth again." Heavy price, so she chose. The wings receded, feather by feather. Her back ached with the echo of flight. She returned home months later, sun-browned, silent, changed. Her father didn't recognize her at first, thought she was some shipwrecked sailor's daughter come to beg, until she sold one of his ships, legally, with documents, with flair. From then on, the merchant's business was hers, and every evening, she walked alone along the harbor, feeling the sea wind on her bare shoulders like ghost wings. "You pause here. Did she ever fly again?" The genie asks, barely above a whisper. You shrug. Maybe in dreams, maybe in memory, maybe when no one's looking. He nods slowly. Then, almost to himself, he says, "Transformation stories always get me." You smile. Because they remind you you're stuck. Because they remind me I was once something else. Your eyes meet. And for a second, the air thickens with silence. Then the moment breaks. I could do one more. You say, "You will do one more." He replies, mock stern. And the fire, now just a hum, seems to lean in too. You run your fingers through the sand, drawing lazy spirals as your voice settles into a quieter rhythm. All right, you say. Let's take things below the surface now, into darker water. The next tale isn't exactly about the fisherman or the genie, but it is tangled in their ripples. Think of it as a ghost, echoing off their choices. The genie watches you now, all pretense gone. His face is calm, but something in his eyes flickers. A recognition, maybe, or guilt. You begin the tale of the sunken prince, long ago, before the brass bottle rolled onto the shore, before the fisherman's calloused hands grasped its neck. There was a prince who believed the sea owed him something. His name was Imran, heir to a coastal kingdom, so wealthy it had pearls for pebbles and ships instead of chariots. He was brave, yes, but not particularly kind. He could charm a crowd but not a friend. And his favorite sport was diving, not for treasure. He was born with enough of that, but for power. He believed there were secrets in the sea that could make him immortal. Not metaphorically, literally. One day, he commissioned the construction of a golden diving bell, studded with protective verses, inlaid with turquoise, and blessed by 9 different priests. He swore it would carry him into the deep realms, the space where water thickens into memory and ancient things still breathe. People warned him. Of course they did. Some doors open only once, said his tutor. Some secrets are buried because they want to be, said a sailor, missing half his voice. But Imran smiled and dove anyway. Here's your historical morsel. Diving bells were very real. The ancient Greeks used early versions, open-bottom chambers to trap air underwater. By the 16th century, they'd been refined enough for limited deep-sea exploration. But the deeper you went, the more pressure warped your mind. Hallucinations, panic, a sense of being watched. Historians still debate whether early divers saw sea monsters or just themselves, peeled thin by pressure and fear. Prince Imran descended beyond, where bells were meant to go. And down there, beneath reef and ruin, past wrecks held together by barnacles, he found it. A palace of black coral, lit from within by a pulse, like a sleeping heart. He stepped out of the bell. Yes, a bad idea. You're catching on. Inside, he was greeted by a woman who wasn't quite a woman. Hair like ink in water, skin like nacre, voice like the hum of whale song. She introduced herself only as the bride of the deep. She said she'd been waiting for someone bold enough to reach her. She said she could grant him immortality. Yes, but not in the way he imagined. He didn't care. And so, they danced, dined, drank. And when he awoke the next morning, he was alone, his limbs heavy, his lungs aching, but not for air, for depth. He tried to return to the surface, but the bell was gone. He tried to swim, but the pressure kissed him back down. The palace no longer glowed, and that's when he saw it, etched into the coral walls. The truth. He hadn't found the palace. He was the palace. It had grown around him, from him. He was its foundation now, still alive, still aware. The sea, after all, doesn't kill its favorite toys. It preserves them. Now, here's your fringe tidbit of the night. Some medieval Arabian sea myths spoke of haunted reefs, entire living structures made from cursed sailors, their consciousness trapped in limestone and salt. These were said to sing at night, luring more ships to their doom, not out of cruelty, but out of sheer loneliness. Imran became one of those songs. Centuries passed, and one day, a bottle drifted down, a brass one, its seal barely holding. Imran's palace reached for it. Curious, inside, a voice stirred, bitter, hungry, a genie. Imran whispered to it, through currents and coral. The genie, listening, grew quiet. Perhaps it wept. Perhaps it laughed, because Imran's fate wasn't just a cautionary tale, it was a trade. Why you tell the next soul who finds you, Imran said. That power isn't something you hold. It's something you owe. And so the genie waited, until the day a fisherman cast his net and found a bottle that hummed with old salt and older sorrow. You fall silent here. The genie at your side shifts. His form flickers slightly, like a flame remembering wind. Was that? He begins, then stops. You don't answer. Some stories answer themselves. Maybe, you say. He nods. I always wondered why the bottle felt heavier some days. You smile faintly. Sometimes, it's the guilt that weighs most. He lets that hang between you like mist. Then, finally, he exhales. I'm not sure if I hate that story or love it. Perfect, you say. That means it worked. The fire hiccups, tossing a single spark into the air. It vanishes before it lands. Far off, the wind brings a scent. Something briny, sharp, like the sea remembering a name it once buried. And somewhere deep below, a coral palace pulses with a heartbeat, not quite its own. The fire gives a soft pop as a knot in the wood splits. You both glance at it, reflex more than curiosity, but it feels like the universe chiming in, saying, yes. Still listening, the genie draws his knees to his chest. You know, he murmurs, it's funny how many people in your stories end up trapped. You raise an eyebrow. You think that's coincidence? He snorts. No such thing in our business. You stretch your arms, the smoke curling around your fingers. All right. Ready for another? He nods. And you continue. Now. This next tale doesn't follow a prince or a fisherman. Not directly. It's about a woman named Layla. A beggar. A thief. A poet. She lived in a city with no name. At least, none that survived. Built in the desert, the city's towers shimmered with heat and cruelty. It was ruled by a king obsessed with symmetry. He measured punishments by the inch. Executions had to start precisely at dawn. Every citizen's home was mandated to have a window of equal width. No matter how poor they were, you'd think that meant equality. It didn't. The rich just had stained glass. The poor, holes in the wall with bees coming through. Layla had a voice that could stir sandstorms, or at least that's what the drunks in the square said. She'd steal crusts of bread and recite poetry in exchange for spare coins or a softer place to sleep. But one night, she stole something she shouldn't have. It wasn't gold or a ring or a royal secret. It was a story, specifically, a forbidden scroll locked away in the king's archive. Rumors said it was older than the city itself, written in a language no one alive could fully read. And Layla? She couldn't resist. Some people steal to eat. Others steal to know. Historians still argue whether this scroll of flame ever existed. Some say it was just a metaphor for revolution. Others insist fragments have been found, etched into bone or melted into obsidian tablets buried beneath ruins in Oman. Fringe archaeologists even claimed it was linked to jinn magic, an instruction manual for binding thought into fire. What's certain is this: Layla read it, or tried to. She unrolled the scroll inside an abandoned tannery, lit a single candle, and began to trace the looping script. The words didn't move, exactly, but they shifted, like shadows at dusk. Every time she blinked, something changed, and then something answered. The candle sputtered, the air thickened, and a voice, no, more like a texture, spoke to her, not with sound, but with understanding. It offered her a bargain. You read me, it said. Now write me. Layla could not speak. You wanted forbidden knowledge, it said. Then you must carry it. Her hands burned, not with fire, but with memory. Her palms blistered with symbols. Her veins glowed, faint and reddish gold. And from that night onward, every poem she uttered bent reality slightly. She'd sing of bread, and someone nearby would suddenly feel full. She'd whisper of thirst, and nearby wells would go dry. At first, she used it sparingly, feeding the hungry, shading the sick. But soon, she grew bold. She wrote a verse about the king's mirror breaking, and that night, it shattered in his chamber. Unprovoked, she wrote another about the tower collapsing. 3 days later, it crumbled during a storm. She wasn't credited. No one even suspected. She was invisible. Remember? Until she wasn't. Now for a bit of actual history. You can tuck under your pillow. In Abbasid Baghdad, poets could wield immense power. Some were considered closer to sorcerers than scribes, praised or punished for verses that shifted public sentiment. There were even fatwas issued against poets whose couplets were deemed politically dangerous. Words could, quite literally, get you executed. Layla's words weren't just dangerous, they were alive. One night, she performed a verse about the city itself, dissolving into sand. It was a test, a dare. Nothing happened, or so she thought. A week later, cracks appeared in the palace walls. A month later, trade routes diverted, wells dried, birds left the sky. By winter, the city was half empty. By spring, It had no name, Layla. Meanwhile, could no longer speak above a whisper. The power inside her voice was too heavy, too hot. She started writing in charcoal instead, on the inside of her sleeves. Her arms became her pages, but the scroll had one last condition. "You must return me," it said, "or I will write you back." She ignored it, because that's what poets do, and slowly, she began to fade, not dramatically, just little things. Her reflection stopped following her mouth movements. Her footprints didn't stay in sand. Her name stopped working on documents, like it was being erased from ledgers. Finally, she returned to the ruins of the archive and laid the scroll back on its pedestal. She whispered one last poem. No one knows what it was. Some say it was a warning. Others believe it was a gift. Either way, she vanished. Now, in some alleyways, if the moon is thin and your hands smell of ink, you might hear her verses again. Half formed, half remembered. The genie sighs. So, she gave it back? More than just the scroll. You say, she gave it herself. He scratches behind his ear. A very human gesture for someone made of smoke. I miss when magic was just wishes and fireworks. You grin. Too late for that. The wind picks up, chasing dry leaves in a circle. Somewhere, a cat yowls, the kind of sound that feels deliberate. 3 stories left. You say, the genie looks at you. Then what? You don't answer. You just reach for another log, set it on the fire, and let the flames decide how the story burns next. The fire gives a soft pop as a knot in the wood splits. You both glance at it, more reflex than curiosity, but somehow it feels deliberate, like the universe leaning in, whispering, still listening. The genie draws his knees to his chest. Funny, he murmurs. How many people in your stories end up trapped? You raise an eyebrow. You think that's a coincidence? He snorts. No such thing in our line of work. You stretch your arms, smoke curling around your fingers like lazy snakes. All right then. Ready for another? He nods. You continue. This next tale isn't about a prince or a fisherman. It's about a woman named Layla, a beggar, a thief, and a poet. She lived in a city with no name, or at least no name that survived. A city built in the desert, where towers shimmered with heat and cruelty. It was ruled by a king obsessed with symmetry. He measured punishments by the inch. Executions began precisely at dawn. Every citizen's home was required to have one window of exact dimensions, rich or poor. Sounds fair, doesn't it? It wasn't. The rich had stained glass. The poor had holes in the wall where bees got in. Layla had a voice that, according to the drunkards in the square, could stir sandstorms. She stole crusts of bread and traded poems for coins or corners to sleep in. But one night, she stole something she shouldn't have. Not gold, not a ring, not even a royal secret. A story, specifically, a forbidden scroll locked in the king's archive. Rumors said it was older than the city itself, written in a language no living soul could read. Layla couldn't resist. Some people steal to write, others steal to understand. Historians still debate whether the scroll of flame ever existed. Some say it was a metaphor for revolution. Others claim fragments have been found, scratched into bone, melted into black glass tablets, buried beneath ruins in Oman. A few fringe scholars believe it was tied to jinn magic, a manual for binding thought into fire. What's certain is this. Layla read it, or tried to. She unrolled it in an abandoned tannery, lit a single candle, and began tracing the looping script. The words didn't move exactly, but they shifted, like shadows at dusk. Blink, and they changed. And then, Something answered. The candle flickered. The air thickened. And a voice, no, more like a texture, spoke. Not in sound, but in understanding. You have read me, it said. Now, write me. Layla couldn't speak. You wanted forbidden knowledge, it said. Then carry it. Her hands burned, not with heat, but memory. Blisters rose in the shape of symbols. Her veins glowed faintly gold. From that night on, every poem Layla uttered twisted reality. She'd sing of bread, and someone nearby would feel full. She'd whisper of thirst, and a nearby well would dry up. At first, she used it carefully, quietly, feeding the hungry, cooling the sick. But her confidence grew, one verse about the king's mirror shattering. And that night, without cause, it did. Another, about a tower falling. 3 days later, during a storm, it collapsed. No one suspected her. She was invisible, remember? Until she wasn't. Here's a little actual history for you to sleep on. In Abbasid Baghdad, poets could wield real political power. Some were treated more like mystics than writers. A well-placed couplet could inspire riots or be punishable by death. Fatwas were issued against verses deemed dangerous. Words could be weapons. Layla's words weren't just dangerous, they were alive. One night, she wrote a verse about the city itself, dissolving into sand. A dare, a test. Nothing happened. At first, a week later, cracks formed in the palace walls. A month later, trade routes shifted, wells dried, birds vanished. By winter, the city was half empty. By spring, it had no name. Layla, meanwhile, could no longer speak above a whisper. Her voice was too full, too heavy. She started writing her verses in charcoal, on the insides of her sleeves. Her arms became her pages, but the scroll had one final condition. You must return me, it said. Or I will write you back. She ignored it, because that's what poets do. And slowly, she began to fade. Not dramatically, just the small things. Her reflection stopped sinking with her lips. Her footprints vanished behind her in the sand. Her name no longer held meaning on documents, as if it was being erased. Eventually, she returned to the ruins of the archive, placed the scroll on its pedestal, and whispered one last poem. No one knows what it said. Some say it was a warning. Others believe it was a gift. Either way, she disappeared. And now, if you walk a narrow alley on a crescent moon, with ink on your hands, you might hear her verses again, half formed, half remembered. The genie exhales. So, she gave it back? Not just the scroll. You say, she gave it herself. He scratches behind his ear. A very human gesture for a creature made of smoke. I miss when magic was just wishes and fireworks. You grin. Too late for that. The wind picks up, chasing dry leaves in a circle. Somewhere, a cat yowls, not an accident of sound, but a deliberate punctuation. 3 stories left. You say. The genie looks at you. Then what? You don't answer. You simply reach for another log, feed it to the flames, and let them choose how the next story burns. The fire shifts colors. For a moment, the flames lean blue. You toss in another log. Sparks leap like startled birds. The genie rests his chin on his folded arms. That last one felt heavy. You nod. Stories with teeth usually are. A beat of silence. Then, this next one, you say, is older than belief and quieter than grief. No kings, no scrolls, just a garden. He perks up a little. A peaceful one? You smile, but it doesn't quite reach your eyes. Not exactly. There was once a man named Farouk who tended the copper garden. It was called that because, from afar, The plants shimmered like hammered metal under the sun. No one knew why the leaves were that color. Some said minerals in the soil. Others blamed it on a forgotten alchemist who had watered the place with moon elixirs until the roses rusted. Farouk didn't care about the rumors. He was a gardener, not a philosopher. And every morning, just before dawn, he walked the spiraled paths barefoot, touching the dew on each leaf. It was said that he never aged, that his hair had been gray since his youth, and stayed gray ever since, that he never left the garden, not once. Traders and scholars came to see him. Sultans sent invitations, but Farouk declined them all, with a bow and a smile, as though each request was a passing cloud. And why would he leave? The copper garden bloomed in ways other gardens could not. There were flowers that whispered your name, only once, just to see if you turned. There were trees whose fruits hung just out of reach, and if you stared long enough, you'd forget what you were reaching for. There was a single pond, small and still, where your reflection aged, even if you didn't. Most said it was cursed. Others said it was sacred. Farouk just called it home. But one year, the rain didn't come. The copper leaves dulled. The whispers stopped. The pond shrank. Farouk knelt in the center of the spiral path, hands to earth. He whispered to the roots, tried old chants from older tongues. Nothing answered. The garden was dying. That night, under a moon thin as a promise, Farouk made a decision. He walked barefoot out of the garden. First time in decades. He walked until he reached the foot of the nearest mountain, where an old woman lived, a former oracle who had long since sealed her mouth with golden thread. Farouk sat before her fire and asked nothing. She said nothing in return, but just before dawn, she handed him a clay seed. "Plant it," she mouthed, "but not in soil." Farouk returned, barefoot, tired. He walked through his fading garden like a ghost through memory. And then he did as she said. He planted the seed in his own shadow, right where it fell at noon. It sprouted by nightfall. By morning, it was a tree, copper-leaved, silver-barked, and instead of fruit, it bore memories, not Farouk's, but everyone else's. A child who visited once would find a dream of the garden waiting in her sleep. A dying man would smell rusted roses just before the end. Poets would wake with verses they never wrote, full of spiral paths and dew. The tree remembered what the world had forgotten. Farouk, however, was never seen again. But some say that if you walk past any garden, and the wind smells faintly of metal and honey, he's near, tending, listening, waiting for the earth to speak again. The genie exhales softly. That one felt like breathing. Good. You say. We don't always need fire. Sometimes we need roots. The wind dies down. The fire hisses in place. Only 2 stories left. And the stars overhead are no longer still. The fire has burned low. Its heartbeat now, a slow pulse of red and amber beneath the logs. You shift slightly, the warmth clinging to your legs, and glanced at the genie. His eyelids droop, but his attention hasn't wandered. He's listening the way old things do, completely and without hurry. There's a story. You begin. Of a man who was both prisoner and jailer. Sometimes that's the same thing. He doesn't interrupt. He knows better by now. This one is about a scholar named Harun. Not a hero, not a villain, just a man who read too much and trusted too little. Harun was born in the city of Basra, at the edge of the marshes, where the river meets the sea and words move like smoke. His home was stacked with scrolls, from floor to ceiling, some copied by his own hand, others smuggled from distant libraries, brittle with salt and age. He was obsessed with one question, a riddle left unanswered in every tongue he'd ever studied. Where do forgotten things go? It sounds simple, childish, almost, but Harun believed it had weight. He was convinced that memory had a shape, that lost knowledge didn't vanish, but pooled somewhere, collecting like water in a dry wool. Historians still argue whether his obsession was rooted in a real historical crisis. Some claim it followed the burning of the great House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Others say it came after he witnessed his own father, a chronicler, have his life's work erased by a jealous vizier. Whatever the spark, it lit a fire Harun couldn't put out. He stopped sleeping, ate only dates and goat's milk, spoke only in proverbs. His neighbors began crossing the street to avoid him, whispering that the scholar had gone mad. And then, one day, he disappeared, not in the dramatic sense. There was no puff of smoke or scorched floorboards, just an empty room, an open window, and one line scribbled on his desk. If forgetting is a door, I am the key. What no one knew, what couldn't be known, is that Harun had discovered something buried beneath the earth, outside the city walls. A vault. A single obsidian door, carved with symbols so old they pulsed when looked at too long. He'd found it by accident, while chasing a rumor whispered by a drunk sailor who swore the ground spoke Latin when it rained. Farouk had unearthed the door, cleared the soil with his own hands, and waited for a sign. He got it on the third night. Not a voice, not a riddle, just a click. The sound of an ancient lock, turning for the first time in centuries. He stepped inside and vanished from all records. Except he didn't vanish entirely, because the vault beneath Basra wasn't empty. It was a library, not built, but grown. The walls were alive, pulsing vines etched with script in a dozen lost languages. The floor was soft with moss that whispered when stepped on. The air smelled like sandalwood and ink. No torches, no lamps, but everything glowed faintly, like moonlight trapped inside skin. And most peculiar of all, the vault had no books. Instead, it had memories. They hung in the air like tapestries, scenes playing out in mist and shadow. A merchant's first love, a soldier's final regret, the name of a spice now extinct, the way a lullaby used to end, before a plague swept it out of use. Harun stayed there, at first as guest, then as guardian, because there was a price. The vault remembered everything, but only if someone stayed behind to forget. So every day, Harun gave it something, a favorite song, the shape of his brother's laughter, the taste of honeyed dates from his childhood. And in return, he learned things no living person should have known. He saw how cities formed like coral, layered from 1,000 decisions. He listened to the original version of words now mangled by time. He traced the grief of a mother in Carthage, frozen forever in amber. But eventually, the trade grew uneven. The vault began to take without asking. One morning, Harun woke unable to recall his own name. The next, he no longer recognized the smell of sea air. A week later, he forgot the concept of outside. Eventually, he forgot he was human at all. And yet, he kept tending the place, because something in him remembered how to care. Now here's your fringe tidbit of the night. Some divers in southern Iraq swear they've heard voices in the deep marshes, speaking languages no one has spoken in 2,000 years. Some believe it's just gas escaping from the mud. Others think the vault is still there, listening, remembering, calling out for someone new to find it. Do you think he was happy? The genie asked softly. You stir the fire, watching the coals settle. He wanted to know where forgotten things go. And he found it. Maybe that's enough. He doesn't reply, just nods once. Above you, the stars are starting to fade into blue. One story left. The fire is low now. Not dying, just quiet. Like it knows this is the last one. The The genie doesn't speak. Neither do you. Not at first. There's a weight in the air, the kind that settles when silence is no longer awkward but holy. You let it rest between you for a while. Then, finally, you say, "This one's short, but not simple." The genie nods, eyes steady. It's about a woman who made wishes come true. For everyone but herself. Her name was Seema, a weaver by trade. She lived at the edge of a cliffside town, where the fog rolled in like slow thought, and every morning smelled of sea salt and nettle tea. Seema was not magical, not in the storybook sense. She didn't chant or summon or carry secret blood in her veins, but her tapestries changed people. They weren't cursed or enchanted. Nothing that obvious. But those who bought them, hung them over beds, wore them as shawls, wrapped newborns in them, always reported strange, quiet shifts in their lives. A brother came home after years away. An illness stopped worsening. A long drought broke with sudden spring rain. At first, the townsfolk called it luck. Then they called it Seema's gift. Eventually, they just called it what it was. Her kindness, woven into every thread. You might think she became rich, or powerful, or overwhelmed by demand. She didn't. She refused to sell more than one piece per month, never repeated a design, took no apprentices, no explanation, no excuses, just a new tapestry. Every month, every full moon. The genie frowned slightly. Let me guess. She asked for nothing in return. You nod. And that's the point, because Seema had a secret. Not a tragic one, but a quiet ache that never healed. Every time she wove something for someone else, she lost something of her own. At first, it was forgettable. A favorite lullaby. The color of her mother's hair. A recipe she'd once perfected. Then it became sharper. The ability to cry at music. The memory of her first kiss. Her dreams. By the time she turned 40, she could no longer remember her own name without writing it on her hand each morning. But she kept weaving. Why? Even the genie doesn't interrupt this time. Because she believed in balance. She believed that the world tilted in small ways, and that maybe, just maybe, her thread could nudge it toward kindness. And she believed, though she never said it aloud, that some people are meant to give more than they receive. And then, one year, no tapestry came. The moon rose. The villagers waited. Nothing. Some climbed to her cottage, expecting sickness or death. But she was gone, not vanished. Gone. The cottage was empty but clean. The loom untouched but polished. On the windowsill sat a final tapestry, folded and tied with white ribbon. It was blank at first glance, but if you touched it, if you really felt it, it shimmered with memory. Everyone who looked at it saw something different. A lost loved one. A regret. A hope. A home. The tapestry now hangs in the town square, behind glass, untouched by wind or sun. And every full moon, the townsfolk gather and sit silently before it. Some bring questions. Some bring grief. They say if you're quiet enough, the threads answer, not with words, but with a feeling you didn't know you needed. Sometimes, that's enough. The fire gives a last soft crack, then settles. The genie exhales, like it's his first breath all night. That was a good one, he says. You shrug modestly, but your lips twitch upward. I know. He looks at you sideways, amused. So what now? You glance at the horizon. The sky is turning gray, streaked with the pale blush of morning. Now, you say. We wait and see what the sun remembers. The genie stretches his legs, smoke trailing from his fingertips. Will you tell more? You look down at the embers, now glowing soft and steady. Ah, yes, you whisper, but not tonight. And so the two of you sit, not in silence, but in story. Even when the words end, the echoes remain.